Very good morning, very good evening to everyone joining us for this fantastic session today. Welcome to your YC Application Compass, an AMA session with YC alumni and industry veterans, Anand and Rohit. First of all, Anand and Rohit, thank you so much for joining us today for this session. And we are basically planning to use this session since the YC deadlines are quite close, 22nd April for the second batch for 2024. So we wanted to use this session to help pursuing applicants for YC with understanding what YC can add to a business, how does the basic journey look like, what are the application stages, and definitely try and answer some of the questions that keep coming in from the audiences. Uh,
Sounds
Before
good.
we start, I would also want to give a brief introduction about both Anand and Rohit. So Anand was most recently the co-founder and CEO of Index, a personal finance mobile app company, which was acquired back in 2021 by Neo. And prior to this, he also founded a Y Combinator-backed fintech company called Inkle, having already spent a decade at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley before then. We also have Rohit Taneja, who's the founder and CEO for Decentro. Rohit is leading Decentro, which is like a full stack banking and payments API infrastructure platform. And we are contributing towards building the future of fintech in India and the future of fintech in Southeast Asia. And leveraging innovative solutions, Rohit has propelled Decentro to become the preferred solution for organizations seeking to modernize their financial operations. So thank you so much, Anand. Thank you so much, Rohit, for joining us today. And before we jump into answering some of the questions that come in from our audiences, would you like to talk about how was your Y Combinator experience? How was your journey? And what were some of the key takeaways that are still helping you since you've been running multiple businesses?
Sure. Yeah, I think Anand will start from you.
All right. Yeah, thanks very much, folks, for welcoming me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, I'm currently on my third official startup. It's actually probably more like my fifth or sixth if you count all the pivots and
Right.
the endeavors. But anyway,
Right.
And my first startup was Inkle, and sorry, my current startup is Inkle, but my first startup was a YC company, a fintech company, and to be honest with you, 2 companies later, I'm still feeling the benefit of being a YC alum. From the resources, the community, the access, etc., and the wisdom. So it's just a lifelong club. It's a phenomenal thing, and I'm very grateful, and to everyone who was able to. I was able to learn from, and I hope I can impart some of that to others. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I guess what I would like to do is just talk through a few things that I think have been super helpful when I speaking to people who are applying over the last few years. I do, probably hundreds of mock interviews and YC prep and advice kind of things. And I've kind of seen kind of something around what works and what doesn't. So I'll share some of the ideas around specifically focusing on the application form over the coming few minutes. But first of all, the overall thing which I think often people do wrong, Rohit, is, funnily enough, not applying. Right?
Yeah.
Is the one most people seem to get wrong.
Right.
And
Right.
it's bizarre. It's like if you don't show up, you ain't gonna
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
it's just one fundamental thing: apply, 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 apply. And people often, question whether they should apply. It's just not even worth thinking about. Apply, right? How do you find, Rohit, about that?
Right. 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 No. No. Absolutely. I think that's a good point. It's like I think it's a common saying, right, which generally applies in the business world, corporate world as well, that half the battle is just showing up. Right? So it's same thing here as well. Um, but yeah, I think there are nuances to it, right? So, for example, there are cases of, I would say, founders also considering this at the extreme and then applying pre-product or like pre-idea, you know, and that definitely is not really a good stage, at least in my opinion. where that doesn't really add value, and YC is also not able to give good feedback because hey, it was like too early to even give feedback, on what you're building. So, but yeah, in 90% of cases, I would say it's always I would lean towards applying as much as possible. In fact, I think just 2 days ago, I was talking to someone. They also had this debate going on in their head that should we apply now? Should we apply, say 2 quarters down the line, right, in the next batch? Um, and they were at a stage where they had the first idea. It was basically validated. There was some traction on the product that they launched, the beta product. But it was not like revenue generating yet. So there was like early signs of user interest, but no signs of revenue. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it all boils down to if they're really feeling confident about it and the traction, the pre-launch traction, for example, or the launch traction which they have, either in the form of say a wish list of users coming in or early alpha beta testers. If that is strong enough, even that is a good enough sign, for YC. In fact, I've seen a lot of applications going successfully just on the basis of a huge wait list of users getting that, like waiting to get access to that product. So yeah, I think you're right. I would say showing up is extremely important. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think that that's one of the biggest mistakes, and often I say to people, it takes 3 or 4 attempts.
Yeah.
Don't expect to get in on first attempt. I mean, nowadays people are getting in slightly earlier than on other occasions, but I think in the past
Mm-hmm.
it has been the averages has been that you only get in for the people that got in, you only get
Mm-hmm.
in on the third attempt, right? With the AI boom, I think it's changing slightly to like you get in on the
Yeah.
first or second attempt. I did get in on the first attempt. It was pretty miraculous. But I think one has to be relentless on this. And this is the most common thing is just apply because people say they're too early or too late. Too late is another one I hear. Too late is, well, let's start with too early, right? So I don't think there's anything as too early, right? I mean, as
Mm-hmm.
Rohit said, if you don't even have a product idea,
Yeah.
then it's kind of better to narrow it down a bit. Interestingly, a few years back, 2 years back, YC released an application call for interviews or registration applications, saying if you don't have an idea, just put no idea, right? and,
Yeah.
and they actually welcomed that. Funnily enough, they tried it as an experiment, but then they didn't continue that. So they actually want you to have an idea now, and as you can see in the form. So I think it's genuinely helpful to have something to be working on for sure. There's no doubt. You're going to get rejected otherwise. That's clear now. I think though that an interesting point that Roy made is if you don't have something really motoring, how useful is the program, right? Now let's look at this summer schedule, right? If you apply now, we're middle of April. You're going to get an interview probably back end of April, early May, right? And then acceptance immediately, and then you're gonna have to fly out to SF early June, right? First June is say June, July, August is the program, right? Now, unless by 1st of June you have some product in the market, you can't really show any traction, and that's what happened to me during my program. It took us most of the program to build anything, and we weren't able to show the traction. And then on demo day, it wasn't a fun demo day, I must say. So I strongly recommend actually is that you have something in works which you think is worth going with immediately, and you ideally have something that you can start working with on 1st of June, right? And if it's hardware or biotech or something that takes years and years, that's still okay. And your industry is special and you deserve more time. But if it's like a software product, then I would argue that between now and June, frankly, you could quite easily get ready. Whether it's a wait list, a bunch of LOIs, or something like that, then it doesn't really matter. So that's kind of on the program side. Coming back to the registration form, right? What I often see as another mistake is um, everyone applies at the last 2 seconds, right? And I'm sure that the application forms are time stamped, right? So it doesn't look great. And also, like, why leave it so late? Of course, it's nice to get some more traction and things, but yeah, I mean, you're a few days away from the program deadline. Just apply early because it is first come first served in terms of interview slots. I believe, right? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Like from a timestamp perspective, it definitely matters. Like for example, it's also similar to, I mean, pretty much I would say any incubator interview, right? Any other accelerator interview as well. And if I was on the other side and evaluating those applications, I'll definitely pay attention to, okay, how prepared is this guy, and has he just come in the last minute? That definitely matters. I think another thing which I realized in the application form, now that you mention it, a common mistake is not going deep enough on metrics. So on whatever metrics you have, it doesn't need to be like, as I said, live traction metrics in all the cases, but metrics in terms of your user interest, what research have you done, why are you the right guy? In fact, I think one of the areas probably we touch upon as part of this chat and later on as well is a great part of early stage evaluation, and YC is an early stage evaluator, is why are you the right founder, for this particular thing? Is there a better founder, right, that can come? And if you are the right founder, then what is it that really makes you special that will help you win and succeed in say the next 5-10 years. So I think focusing on the founder journey, on your journey, and yes, highlighting the metrics, any kind of metrics that you can highlight, especially around market, right? If you have some of those, yeah, those are really valuable. Those are common mistakes I see as well on the application form.
Yeah, metrics is super important. We say it time and time again. Like it's, I find it that humans cannot remember broad statements very easily, right? But they can remember metrics super easily, right? And quotes, examples, stories, but especially metrics, right? These are things that humans can remember very nicely, right? And I think it's super important to sprinkle them out throughout the application form, because it's the one thing that can back up broad statements, right? And it captures someone's eyes much more easily, right? So if I say to you that 10% of people use this or something like that, that's something probably you'll remember at the end of this talk. But if I just make a broad statement that loads of people use this, it's not easy to remember that, right? So these things are what matter in application forms. Bear in mind that they are reading 30,000 companies, right, of application forms for just under 250 slots, right? That's a less than 1% chance that you're going to get accepted. So I think you got to do everything you can in your power to increase your odds from 1% towards, say, perhaps 10%, and then it's yours to lose, right? If you get an interview, there's things you can do for the interview which we won't necessarily dwell on today because this is more about the application, I think. But certainly for the the application, 1% chance towards a 10% chance. How do you increase your odds? I think you do a dozen things, and it's a probability game. And if you do those dozen things, it gets you towards 10%. And then even if you're in the other 90% after that, what could you do? And often YC says this is, hey, it might be that there's nothing wrong with your application. It's just that there was such a sheer volume of other applicants that we had to have some other way of filtering, and therefore they just reject you because there's just something that looks slightly more interesting to them. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your startup, and you'll, I'm sure, do very well regardless. And you should, focus on how to build a great team nonetheless. Um, but still, I think what you have to do is focus on increasing your odds, right? And how do you increase your odds? It's a probability thing, right? You need to do one of 10 things, and we'll go through some of those now. But it's a numbers game, and for me, um, don't be too distraught if it's not working out. Apply again, of course. Learn, reapply with the learnings, and most importantly, when you reapply, you must show what you did different, right? Um, was there an iteration? Was there a pivot? Was there a new co-founder? Was there, a technical co-founder that joined the team? Was there, something ideation, a linear ideation that you went along, something like that, that ideally you improved on something from the last application form. I think they even asked that, right, in the forms.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably we can take that as a cue and go into this one, which is what are the factors that really increase your probability of getting in to YC. And I think one of the factors that I will start off with is just having better, like deeper understanding as much as possible about your space, right? Which goes back to the point of why you particularly for the space. I think the passion has to stand out, right? Passion has to really show up in your application. And there are a few ways you can do it. Like, for example, one of the ways I did it obviously is showing a personal pain point that was impacting me for the last 3-4 years as part of building the first company. And then, of course, the company that acquired my first company. So I think when you show that kind of a path, and it's clear that okay, you saw this pattern as a common problem, across a small company, a large company in different sectors. Um, and interestingly, the problem has stayed like throughout those couple of years, right? Few years at least. Then that proposition becomes really compelling, right, for the evaluator. That, okay, this guy has really seen a problem; it has impacted him personally, so he's going to be at least somewhat passionate, right? Um, and I think that's one of the common sayings as well, which YC says that solve the problem first for yourself. And if you're just building for yourself in the first go, like you won't even need early users to validate. You can just be your first validator, and that's a very powerful thing to be. Obviously, not all startups can do that, but at least those that can vouch for or can try for using their own product, it applies to them directly. I would suggest that's very very powerful. That really increases your odds, of getting in. And second is if even if you're not able to, of course, show this kind of a history, and you can just show like 6 months, 12 months of work, which is like a bare minimum, I would say. Like, do not go in with like 1 month, 2 months of prep. I would say that would be like really exceptional if you get in just with that kind of prep. Like it's really, really hard and unheard of. At least 6 months, bare minimum, just in terms of trying out stuff, maybe pivoting a couple of times, hitting upon the eventual idea. And during those 6 months, you'll probably learn the equivalent of 2 years worth of regular job, for example. I think that's another way which I've seen a few early stage companies stand out when they go for YC. Yeah.
Yeah, showing your passion, as you said, Rohit, super important. In the it's a long application form, and there are numerous questions. I think when you're sprinkling your ideas through it, you'll see that it's actually incredibly well crafted, and it makes you think nicely, right? So I'd encourage everyone to do it regardless, because it's a great thing when you're starting up to think of that way. And it's good practice as well when you keep doing this several times. um, uh, in the format of the writing, uh, some ideas that I think I wrote down, some things that I thought were important. At the top of it was show your passion. So it's great that Roy had just pointed that out. um, Brevity is key. I think, like, don't make it long, right? If you make a very long application form, it's hard for these folks to read it. And these partners, the YC group partners, prefer something that's not too short, so you can't be like bullet points, right? I don't think that looks nice either. It looks like you didn't put much effort. So it should be prose, i.e., long form text, not bullet points. But keep it brief. Keep it like towards, 3, 4, 5 lines per question in the application form. If you write like War and Peace and like 1,000 lines for each thing, they're just not going to be able to read it all because they've got 30,000 applications to read, right? I think a grammar check is helpful. I very often see spelling and grammar problems. So use Grammarly, for God's sake. It's free. Um, and ideally, get someone to read it, get a few friends to read it. But Grammarly has an amazing tool that makes sure that all the obvious spelling and grammar mistakes are fixed. And then pay attention to the operating question, right? The operating word in the question, right? Because often people will read a question and then answer what they'd like to answer instead of what was actually asked. And that happens a lot in these application forms. So I think if you just pay attention to the application question, the actual operating word, you'll find that actually, oh, you know what, I didn't quite answer that. So when you read it again, and then you can tweak it a bit. Another common one is no decks are allowed, right? Everyone assumes they're going to paste a deck somewhere, a deck link. That's absolutely not requested, or it's not allowed. Yeah, there is a video, of course, we'll talk about that, but there's also a demo, but neither of those are for a deck. And so, yeah, those are the common things that I see in the application form. And then finally, as Rohit said, metrics, sprinkle metrics throughout there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think going on to the next one, right? Another common factor, which is probably, I would say, would rank in the top three at least, right? Would be a big market, uh, or at least an expanding market, right? And they may not be the same, right? So there are scenarios where I'll probably get into this a bit deeper, right? So there are, let's say, if developing for you're developing a new EV startup, right? You're developing the next Tesla, for example, right? Um, that's both. That's a big market now at this stage. It was not a big market for sure 10 years ago. um, and it's also an expanding market, a rapidly expanding market. Right? So I think that expanding market, and of course having, like, if you are able to intersect both, it's amazing. Probably the best combination that you can have, right? So, for example, in our case, it's fintech, right? Fintech being the overarching theme, and then embedded finance or embedded infrastructure, banking infrastructure, being the focus theme for us at Decentro. Um, so there's a larger tailwind of banking and fintech in general growing in the country and this region overall, and then of course software coming into simplify it. So if you're able to marry these two things, it becomes very powerful, right? It's a big market and expanding at the same time. I would say if you're not able to get into a big market as well early on, for example, a very specific AI tool 5 years ago, right, would have been a slightly narrow, small market. But if you were able to show that it's an expanding market, right, it's probably $100 million market now, but it will become $1 billion market in the next 5 years. Using, of course, again, some statistics, some metrics, some real case studies, right? Some real research, of course, external to your company. Um, that is very impactful as well. Right? Again, YC, just like I would say any other investor, is very, very, I would say, careful at evaluating markets as well. That doesn't mean they're always very centric on markets, and that's not the major deciding factor, but it's definitely in the top three, four. Because if you look at it, right, ultimately, your goal is not just to get into YC, right? Your goal is to build a successful company, and YC is a platform to help you get there. So, what YC also evaluates is, okay, will these guys be able to take this beyond YC? Right? Like once you exit post demo day, will you have great standing? If you don't have support of YC, hypothetically, right? I think that is a very important, I would say, parameter for them as well to evaluate. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. They often say, they can fix or they can help a, let's say, a struggling team. They can help a a weak product. They can do a bunch of magic, right? One thing they cannot do is fix a small TAM, right? That is an immediate rejection, right? And why? It's because they're a VC, right? They want to invest in a company that has a clear path to $100 million run rate and a unicorn outcome, right? They have to show returns to their investors. They run a fund, just like every other VC. So I think that they are genuinely looking for large outcomes, and large outcomes only come with large markets, and very often people fail to demonstrate that in the application form. It could be that you're focusing on something that's actually is not venture backable. It's a lifestyle company, or it could be something that is more servicey, like a dev shop. Either way, you're going to get rejected 100%. They only back startups, right? Tech, ideally tech, sometimes D2C, but generally with a tech angle, and with a clear path to $100 million run rate, right? At the very least. And so please demonstrate that right at the forefront of your application form. There's a question around that, but throughout you need to talk about how the opportunity is very big. Recently in a video, they pointed out that it's hard to predict what's going to be a big market in 10 years and what you're building now is for a bigger market later. But I think the problem statement has to be big. The solution may not be, right? When the Airbnb founders launched Airbnb, room sharing was not a thing. When Uber launched Uber, ride hailing was not a thing. When Amazon launched a bookstore, online e-commerce was not a thing. But the problem statements were huge, and that's where they were able to demonstrate that, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. Yeah, and I think another thing which probably comes maybe in the top five, six, for sure, and the factors would be a reference, right? A reference from an existing YC company. Even better if they can be a customer. Nothing better than that. I mean, just getting a reference from a friend or like just saying, "Hey, I know that guy." That is obviously okay, but that's not really going to help you that much. What will really help you is saying, okay, one of the top 100 or top 500 YC companies is our customer, right, or a potential customer, right? And the founder obviously recommends you, to the partner. And the best part is it's very transparent. Like there's no way to like game this system because the partners genuinely take feedback from founders like us, right? And they genuinely ask us that, hey, do you actually recommend this company because you believe in them, right? Or because of XYZ, or are you just recommending casually? Like so, and there are parameters by the way, or rather, I would say the way to recommend the company as well. So yeah, I think that is something that you can really check as well. Especially if you're B2B, it becomes very easy. to have a really powerful YC company, a strong YC company as your customer cohort. Or even if not, as I said, just a wish list of or a wait list of these 10, 20 YC companies if you can add on the B2B front as well. That is equally powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, on the alumni recommendation, I don't think it's necessary to get like 20. I think it's kind of over the top. I think
Right.
getting three or maybe four, something like three to five,
Right.
and people that ideally know you, right? Not don't go for like Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, and ask him to write an application form recommendation because he's Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb. But go to him if you know him, of course, or get to know some of YC Lums. There's nothing better than that. And frankly, the community is incredibly open, especially in India. Get to know some, and they'll definitely be willing over time to give you application references. That really helps. I think two or three at least. Um, and then yeah, just in terms of the one other thing on the application form, right? I think people get this one wrong a lot. Is the video, right? The team video. Well, there's actually two kind of videos, right? There's the demo video and the team video, right? The team video, you know, obvious things, right? Sit together if you can, good sound quality, good production, good video. Production quality does not matter. Funnily enough, they don't want it to be like, a competition for how much you can spend on the video. It's just like the two or three of you sitting together, or one, two or three of you sitting together, however many it is, and you're just talking. Right? It's a conversation. It's an introduction. Don't read off the screen for God's sake. They hate that. They can see your eyes moving. Um, it's a natural introduction to yourselves, and they want to just see how it is. Can they this team communicate nicely, and discuss the problem statement. It's only 60 seconds, right? People go over 60 seconds, but don't do that. It's 60 seconds, low production quality but good sound quality, good video. You don't need a fancy background or anything. Just introduce yourselves nicely, and don't go over 60 seconds. I think that's super important. And then on the demo video, that can be longer, probably a couple of minutes, but again, it doesn't have to have music in the background and animations and so on. It's just something as simple that how to show your product working. Don't use a deck, right? Unless you're, again, hardware, biotech, whatever, but you have a right to use a deck, I guess, because it takes years to build something. But genuinely, if you're a software team, show something. Show like, oh, you ping this API call and it sends a text message. What a simple something as simple as that for Twilio perhaps would have done the trick. But show something that you've done. And the most famous example of this that I can think of is the FamPay founders who did a wait list for their fintech app, and they just got like 20, 30,000 kids to sign up for a spinny wheel game, and they would win 5 or 10 rupees. And it had nothing to do with their neobank card for kids, but it could just show that they could get to the kids, right? And make it viral, right? Make something viral. So I think just showing a LOIs, um, showing a demo of something that's available, that they can play around with, or showing a wait list, showing something um, can really help with the application form, the video and the team video, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great point. In fact, video is one of the most important elements. Yeah, you're right. Probably even higher than the reference, higher than everything else on the other side, like external. And in fact, I think a couple of months back, I was just looking at my video out of nostalgia, and I realized it was like 45 seconds or so. I was trying really hard at that time to make it 60 seconds, but I was like, hey, I already covered what I had to say, so okay, that's fine. No need to stretch it to beyond the limit. And yeah, it was exactly like this. I was just me sitting in a room, exactly the room where the whole idea started. Interestingly, it was the first week of lockdown in 2020, so there was anyway no way for me to go to an office or do an outside setting. So yeah, very casual, just me with the headphones, shooting that video, and yeah, it went through in the first shot itself. But you're right. I think the another thing why the video is important is also it shows the coordination and chemistry between the co-founders, right? How they really able to gel together, do they sit well together? Um, how is the facial expression, right, when they're really giving it? And I mean, of course, we all know, right? The first impression that you get from a person's face, his body language is extremely valuable. In fact, that really changes a lot of dynamics, right? When you go into a room as well. So I think, yeah, it's also a way for you to assess, how passionate do you really feel to the external observer when he's actually checking your video, because your passion will show when you're speaking on that video. You'll really be like into the flow, right? And it will seem like very natural for you. Yeah.
And you bring up an interesting point about founders, right? You were a solo founder, right? I think there's a misconception that solo founders is a no go. That's not true at all. Um, I count a dozen solo founders
Yeah.
teams, solo founder teams in the India cohort, of which there are 300 YC companies. So it's a small percentage, right? But it's not a no, right? And the chances are that you have to demonstrate something, right? And typically it's the fact that there is a tech co-founder, right? So in fact, these are two separate points, right? One is solo allowed? It's a clear yes, but you have to be pretty strong, right? You have to be very compelling. Half of those solo founders, in the half of the dozen solo founders in India were tech, and the other half were non-tech, right? So that was kind of demonstrating somehow that they had the tech skills. The other half that were non-tech, I think they had a larger challenge, but they got through because they were able to demonstrate a deep understanding of the problem statement, right? So solo is allowed. It's just that the chances of you getting accepted is much lower, and it's already 1% chance, right? So do yourself a favor and try to get a co-founder. And can you apply solo now and add a co-founder? Yes. You have time before they review the application. You can even add for the next application and show that you've made efforts. So solo is allowed, but try your very best to have a co-founder. It's a hard journey as it is. And I know that both Rohit and I have added co-founders after starting solo, and it was an important thing for us, for me at least, for sure. And then coming to the whole idea around tech founders, it is crazy important if you can have a tech co-founder in the starting team, right? I think probably the one thing that's most likely to get you rejected is not having a tech co-founder. And very often I hear people saying, well, what about if I outsource the tech to a dev shop, or if I hire contractors, or I have a team of engineers already? Those are all fine, but honestly speaking, then in fact, many of them are not fine. But honestly speaking, YC loves the fact that there's a person in its founder amongst the founders who can code full stack ideally, but code and construct the earliest version of the project without any external developers, any contractors, any dev shops. If you can demonstrate that, I think you probably overcome the biggest tick in the checklist, right? Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. I think ultimately because see, we're building a. I mean, the people who are applying or attending this are most likely in the tech domain, or they want to build tech companies. So absolutely, one of the key factors will be to have a tech understanding, solid understanding. By the way, there's a very important, like I would say, a second order, third order effect, which I realized. Why being a tech founder, or at least having a tech co-founder, is important. It's because you're the next set of, I would say, developers, product people, right, that you hire in the company. They have to look up to you. So it's very important that you bring that expertise, or at least some basic foundation on the table. Um, Otherwise, it's going to be a really hard conversation, and getting the next set of team members is going to be really hard. So that is the reason why it becomes super important for the founding team to have really good tech skills, or very solid understanding of tech itself, even though even if they don't code, that's perfectly okay, or they used to code at some point. And yeah, interesting by the way, Anand. I think that you also mentioned about being a solo founder first and then adding a co-founder later. By the way, I think one of the things I'm always curious on is how was your Bay Area experience? Was it like did being, because in my case it was a remote batch, right? The first fully remote batch. I'm here to meet a lot of YC partners. I think most of the YC partners in person, and a lot of the YC batch as well. But yeah, how was the in-person experience for you?
Well, you were not lucky on that front, because I think it was a phenomenal experience. Back then, the office was in Mountain View in Silicon Valley, not here in San Francisco City, although they've now since shifted here, the main office here, and the main program here as well, and it's now mandatory in person again, although for a few years it was not. But when I did it in summer 17, it was mandatory in person in Mountain View. And really, it was a phenomenal experience. It opened my eyes to Silicon Valley, and some of the highlights were the the office hours that you get, the individual office hours with phenomenal people. They don't give you specific advice; they give you timeless advice. Right? They don't know much about your industry, probably. Like they some of them have never been to India, and we were building for India, and that's okay because they give you fantastic timeless advice, right? Um, Secondly, the group office meetings were great. It's like a ring that you form of 20 startups, and you all discuss each other's problems, so you can really lean on each other. And again, some people in that group may not have direct understanding of your industry, or you may not of their industry, but it's okay. Again, like really good best practices come out there. The dinners were the fantastic things. So they wheel out. So like the Airbnb founders, the Dropbox founders, those were just amazing experiences. Like really eye opening. It's like confidential discussions on their earliest journeys, and then the demo day in the Computer History Museum was just an incredible thing. 1,200 investors, 60 seconds per team up on stage, and yeah, it was just. And then that was the demo day, and then there was the investor day where it was like kind of speed dating for the founders to meet the investors, and they had an app and things like that. It was really well organized. It's a phenomenal experience, and I strongly recommend it to anyone. So yeah.
Right, right, absolutely. Going back to the application, I think we covered the video. We covered, of course, no decks allowed. They didn't help in the evaluation, anyways. The demo as well. Probably we can double click on I think there are a couple of these oddball questions that get thrown in, right, as part of the application. What was the oddball question in your batch? I'm not sure if it changes very often, but I think it just does change once in a while. Yeah.
Yeah, they asked I think name one thing that you've hacked, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Personally, right?
Same.
Um, and that they often change it, but I think it's funny because they actually go to that sometimes. And I know at least one partner who goes to that first and sees, what have you tried different. So I think it's an interesting question. I don't think you need to spend too long on it. Like again, just 5 or 6 things. There's an oddball that's in the personal profile. There's another couple of questions, interestingly, that they do like to go to. One is right at the end of the application form. It says, um, if you have any other ideas, write them here, right? Apart from the one that you're working on. And funnily enough, they actually look at that, right? Because if you don't know already, you may not be aware that half of applicants, once they come into the badge, pivot, right? I mean, it's crazy, right? It's like they're so early, and interestingly, with the Chat GPT boom and AI boom, it's actually the soft pivots or even the hard pivots are happening even more nowadays, and that's during the batch, right? So often they just say, like, what other ideas do you have that you might work on, and they find it quite interesting. But the oddball question and that question, and then perhaps the other question, which I think they really like to read, it's super important, is what do you understand that others do not?
Yeah.
They love that one, right?
Yeah.
And there is an opportunity to set off a light bulb, right? And if you can set off that light bulb in their mind, they will remember you, right? And that's half of the game won, right? And that question right there is, it has to be insightful. It can't be just something bland like, oh, we're better than the competition because we have, a better UI or UX. That's not that's not going to fly. What they're looking for is we understand our customers and what they think and what they do because we just interview them relentlessly. We're just after feedback continuously, and they've told us this. And this thing, the answer to this question doesn't come from you; it comes from the customer. And if they can really give you some insights and you display that, then it just shows an incredible skill that you're able to listen to customers. And one thing that YC always hammers home into you is speak to customers all day, code all night, right? That's the mantra, right? And if you can learn to demonstrate that, then I think it's super powerful. So, yeah.
True, true, absolutely. No, you're right. I think, yeah, I think this is where probably goes back to the first point we were discussing, right? That why are you the right guy, for this thing? So it's very closely linked to that, right? Closely related to how your background has been, how you feel strongly about it, and of course, more importantly, what is that unique insight which is really compelling you to build this now. In fact, this is also an interesting, like I would say, question to highlight the timing. And I think one of the key factors, in fact, there was a, like I would say, a great study by HBR. Always, I would say, dubious in general of these generic servers, but like this study really speaks to, I would say, our founder mindset, and because we've seen this in action, which is if you were to just place a percentage bet on each factor, on what percentage does this factor contribute to the success of a company, out of that timing stands out, like by a far margin, right? And timing stands out by 50%, which was astonishing for me personally. Like more than anything else, like capital funding and all that. So I think this probably, like this question specifically, right? What do you realize, or which is goes back to the industry, is also a great place to show the timing. But why is this timing correct, and what do you realize specifically about this timing for this particular problem that you solve? And of course, on the oddball question, that's actually a place where you can get really creative, right? So, like of course, the Airbnb guys, we all know the story of the cereals that they were making, right, and how they funded their own initial dorm operations. So I think that kind of, I would say, creativeness, sort of craziness as well, to some extent, is what they're looking at probably to start.
Yeah, for sure. And that quirkiness can help. You don't have to go out of your way to try and be
Yeah,
humorous or quirky or crazy, but if there's something interesting, it always helps. This just the sheer volume of applications, right? Um, one small note I would like to point out that they have an issue if there is an extraordinary difference of equity in the application. If it's like someone is 90% and the other founder is 10%, it's just a bit weird. And it almost sounds like you bought that other founder in because you needed to display something like you had a tech co-founder and the tech co-founder has 10%, and 10% is the minimum, of course, that the YC accepts as a co-founder in the application form. So it just looks weird, and very frankly, they can see right through it, right? That you brought someone in just for that. I mean, okay, like at what point do you equalize equity or something? It's an interesting question, and I think um, if you're a non-tech founder bringing in a tech founder, or even regardless, I think you have to realize that the 90% of the journey, or 99% of the journey is in 10 years ahead, and there is no value in the idea, right? It's all about execution, and therefore, if there's someone that deserves an equal weighting, it's your co-founder, and an idea has no additional value because everyone has ideas, right? So I think that you really have to demonstrate a near equal amount of equity, and if you don't if you have a disproportionate equity and it's heavily weighted, I often see that they get rejected, and it's clear why, because it doesn't look like it's a fair thing, and when you're applying. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Again, I think the co-founder dynamics really help there. Great.
One last
Yeah,
advice I have, Rohit. Um, you know, startupschool.org. That's YC's own MOOC, massive open online course, and they love it because they created it, and I think it's brilliant. I actually did startupschool.org for my new startup after I did YC's core in-person program, right? I thought it was phenomenal, right? Really amazing to see, like, they've literally open sourced their entire, program to anyone, and it's free. It's crazy. It's free, right? And it's open to everyone. There's no selection criteria. And there was one batch a couple of batches ago where they said like something crazy, like 40% plus of the cohort, the batch, had done startup school, right? And I thought that's just really interesting because they must mean that they track you, or and you use your same Hacker News ID. So do startup school. It's a phenomenal thing. It's really well structured. It got great content. Do it for yourself, even if it's not for the application form. But it actually shows that you've done startup school when you apply, and I think they like that. So,
absolutely, absolutely. No, that's a phenomenon. I think yeah, probably we'll delve deeper into this probably. In general, the whole hacker news, I would say, effect as well, and of course how YC contributes later on. I think yeah, we can. I think with this, I believe we are pretty much done with the application on what to focus on the application. We can move to questions, comments. Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, Rohit, and thanks, Anand, so much for such an expansive discussion around all the aspects of the application process for Y Combinator some of the gems of pointers that you shared, especially things around how a founder should be looking at the expansiveness of the market and how much the market can grow. Definitely having metrics, at least some metrics possibly that can be shared at the time of applying for Y Combinator. And I think one of the biggest highlights was also what Anand said, that Y Combinator is first come first based service. So the sooner you apply, there's definitely a higher chance, depending on your idea and your model. But before we close, we'll just take a couple of questions. I would urge the audience, if you have any other questions, you can always put it on the comment section. Uh, One question that we had and we wanted to check with you was, does being an experienced founder compared to being a first time founder give you a certain benefit, especially in the selection for Y Combinator? And second would definitely be being a non tech founder versus being a tech founder while you're applying for Y Combinator. What are your thoughts about this?
Right. Yeah, I think one of the things is probably Anand and I both really biased as well on this one, especially the first question, though, because yeah, we're both second time, third time founders, right, respectively. So yeah, I think our answer would obviously should be taken with that bias in mind. But I think having said that, I don't think there's any, at least in our perspective, YC, obviously they mentioned it as well. They would not have a bias person on this. It obviously helps in general if you are a second time or experienced founder. It doesn't need to be like, I would say, like your first endeavor doesn't need to be like a full blown multi-million or multi-billion dollar company as well. It can be like a small intra company operation as well, right? Like you would have done something marvelous in a larger company, right? Or something marvelous in a smaller company as well. Right? So being, say, an ex-founding member or just an ex-CXO or ex-VP in a larger startup or even a smaller fast-growing company also really helps. But you have to sort of show, of course, some domain expertise, or at least some domain knowledge that you've gathered over the years, either in school, college, whatever, right? And that is contributing to where you are, right? So that is what they look for, like some dotted line, some connectivity in your journey. At least, yeah, that's my perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I think don't worry too much if you've not been a founder. I think you'll find that the vast majority of the batch is first-time founders, um, and you can't really control that now anyway. But frankly, just apply. It's not something you need to worry too much about. Uh, Ideally, you've had some exposure, some experience, but I found actually just the earliest you start your startup journey, the better, because there's nothing better than starting up in order to learn how to start up, right? So, MBA and things like that not necessarily going to help you as much as the startup experience itself. So I think that's super important. And then yeah, just in terms of the technical co-founders you mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, um, there's probably one thing that's going to get you rejected. It's not having a technical capability in your founder team, right? So it's super important. And probably this is the biggest question that comes up amongst India founders that I see is, I don't have a technical co-founder. Should I still apply? It's a tough one for me to answer. There is no great answer for that. I think the best answer is hurry up and find a technical co-founder. There are great tools for that. There's startupschool.org, which is where I met my technical co-founder, and yeah, just life-changing experience for me. So it's free. Use that tool. It's a co-founder matching tool there. You can try out with different people, but generally co-founders come from your own journey, like college or in your jobs or something like that, and that's where generally most people find co-founders. So try your very best to find a technical co-founder if you're not a technical founder yourself, because that's the one thing that's going to almost definitely get you rejected, as the numbers show, right? So.
Absolutely.
All right, I think uh, we'll, we are we have actually come close to I think over the deadline for the session. So we'll close the session for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Anand and Rohit. Thank you so much for the audiences also who have joined us from various geographies. I would also like to take just a couple of seconds. We are also giving you an opportunity, and this is for all YC applicants. You can write to us at marketing@decentro.tech, and before 20th of April, we'll have both Anand and Rohit look at your applications if you haven't submitted your applications to Y Combinator already, and we'll come back and help you make the solutions better, more sharper, and more focused for Vicom. Thank you so much once again. And with this, we'll end our stream. Thanks and have a
Thank
great day.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Decentro. Thank you.